Well, to say that the disappointment of not having a red wave is not real would be dishonest and disingenuous. I think every conservative today feels like, what happened last night? Now, in reality, really nothing changed. Um, we're in the same sorry shape that we were 2 days ago. This isn't the same gut check that we got after what happened in 2020. But the hopes were so high, the aspirations were so high of really what should have been, yes, a red wave. Everything was there for one to happen. It was midterm, a president who was incredibly unpopular, underwater, wrong on everything. Inflation is up, crime is up. We've got a crisis at the border. People can't afford gas, they can't afford groceries, and even if they are getting a pay raise, the rate of inflation is actually wiping out any pay raise that they might get. So there we are. There we are. And on top of it, he keeps doubling down on basically now he has declared war on the entire fossil fuel industry. Where is that going to get us while he's out there with hat in hand begging countries like Venezuela to give us some oil? We could turn this economy around and we could be rocking right now. And so as we look at what happened last night, what's our takeaway? Is our takeaway the American people apparently don't care? Is our takeaway it was the night of the incumbent? Because the Republicans who were running again were reelected by and large. DeSantis rocked. He won big. Rubio won big. Weiner in Ohio won big. J.D. Vance is in. So there were things that went great that way. And of course, we're now listening to people like whiny, snivelly Ben Shapiro talk about that's it. Ron DeSantis is now the leader of the conservatives, and Donald Trump is history, and all this is Donald Trump's fault. Oh, shut up and go away. I had to listen to a Bush speechwriter on faux pas news, formerly known as Fox News, last night, talk about that, this is an absolute disaster for the Republicans, which made me step back and wonder, was that on purpose by the rhinos? You think about some of the places where maybe some real Republican money, a real Republican push, could it have gotten Oz over the finish line? Could it have gotten Herschel Walker over the finish line? Did the rhinos work behind the scenes to make problems even bigger in places like Arizona? I look at all that and I wonder, because again, the Bush crime family does not want Donald Trump to ever return to any type of power. And do I think that they would eat their own in a midterm so that they could set Donald Trump up as the fall guy so that they could spin this in a different direction for 2024? Absolutely, and twice on Sunday. That's the physical takeaway from some of what I saw happening last night. But there is a spiritual side, and I don't do a lot of that on this channel, but I'm going to today. Because we've got all types of pundits on both sides talking about what happened, what didn't happen last night. One thing is for certain, Biden is not going to feel any pressure whatsoever to try to modify his program in any shape or form. Therefore, he's just going to double down. And, you look at places like Pennsylvania and you're thinking, people, what are you doing? Seriously. Sending that guy, Uncle Fester, to the Senate. What are you doing? And then they posthumously elect a dead man. And you just shake your head. I live 30 minutes, well, actually less than 30 minutes from the Michigan border. And I can tell you the anger against Governor Whitmer was real. It was palatable during the height of the pandemic when they were under just absolute regime lockdown, and Michiganders were coming into Ohio looking for places that they could shop, eat, and kind of be normal. And you're thinking, what happened? Now, again, the psychological aspect, I hate to give credit to Biden and Pelosi, but Biden understood, and I warned you in the early spring when we started to see mandates lift, when masks went away on things like airplanes, and they were starting to lighten up, and they were starting to bring Fauci back and reel him back. And then eventually, of course, he announced his own retirement. I said then that was all about they're heading into the midterms, and they know if they can kind of create the image that, well, life is getting back to normal. Things are going to be okay. Things are going to be okay. Because, again, the American people, by and large, do have a very short attention span and a shorter memory. Then, as we got into the summer months, into the early fall, and President Biden pumping all of the strategic oil supply into our economy to kind of bring gas prices down. But I warned you right after the midterms, watch out, because the gas prices will go back up. And I'm telling you, as we get ready to head into the winter months, the inflation is going to really hit hard. And so we see this now kind of stalemate. You've got a lot of political pundits on both sides of the aisle talking about tribalism, that you're red or you're blue, and that's what you go for, and that people voted for Fetterman despite the fact that he is obviously impaired. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I as a pastor, as a Christian, as a fellow human being, I want him to get better. And I really think what he should be doing right now is focusing on his health and getting better. And I can tell you that I have dealt through the years with a number of people who have suffered from strokes, and no, they don't all make full recoveries. And so we don't know what's going to go on with Mr. Fetterman in that way, and yet people voted for him anyway. And so you look at all of this and you think, what is the takeaway? Well, again, I'm going to do something I normally do a lot of here, but I feel needs to be done today. Professing themselves to be wise, they became as fools. This is the Epistle of Romans, written by the Apostle Paul. Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. For this cause God gave them up to vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which was against nature, and likewise men, leaving the natural use of the woman, and burned in their own lust one for another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which is meat. And even in this day, as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over, don't miss this, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient. A reprobate mind. There is a clear division in this country between the left and the right, between the woke and the rational. We have an entire political agenda that has said, if the conservatives get in there, it'll end democracy. Well, first of all, let's be real clear on a couple of things. We're not a democracy. We are a democratic republic that we work through designated elected officials to represent us. Joe Biden, from the time he entered the Oval Office after taking the oath of office, through executive order and fiat, has done away with legislation that was actually voted on through a democratic process. He has overridden all of it. That's why we have an unsecure border. It's why we've got runaway inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They are the existential threat to, quote, democracy. In actuality, they are the killers of the republic. But what is it they've done? What is the big things that they're pushing for that they say are democratic? You have a guy who is literally impaired in John Fetterman, but yet was able to cognitively, in his victory speech last night, take a victory lap for abortion. You have an entire party that they've made their whole ideology about abortion, same-sex union and rights and transgender and drag queens, and making sure that we bring all of this woke into the military, all of this woke into your child's classroom. Professing themselves to be wise, we're constantly being told that that which was always considered, normal, you're a boy, you're a girl. Oh, no. That was brought over here by white European settlers, as if this concept of male female didn't start to the Middle Ages. Give me a break. We live in a post-Christian society, a society that has basically rejected God, certainly rejected the moral absolutes of God. And God says, you know what, it's gotten to a point where I'm just going to give them over to a reprobate mind. A reprobate mind. And once people are given over to a reprobate mind, they do off the wall that you just can't explain. Come on, 5 years ago, would the vast majority of people in this country, even if they identified as liberal Democrat, would they have wanted a drag queen coming into their child's preschool and reading stories to them? Would 5 years ago any liberal parent put up with the idea of grooming children and talking them out of their, quote, sexual gender, and maybe they need hormone blockers, or maybe they need penile removal surgery? Do you see where we are right now? What happened last night was blue states got bluer, red states got redder. The divide got clearer. You listen to people, even entertainers out in California, complain about the bureaucracy, complain about the never-ending mandates and regulations. They complain about the overreach and the hypocrisy of a Gavin Newsom, yet I guarantee you they walked in the voting booths and they sent him back. I have to be honest, I was wrong. I really, really thought, listening to some of the people on the left and where they were and how fed up they were with all of this nonsense, that when they got in the voting booth, they would say, you know what? I can't keep sending these same people back into power. We've got to have a change. And no, they didn't. They lined right up in lockstep, and they've given Gavin Newsom another 4 years. Someone did tweet out, apparently Democrats like crime, homelessness, and just kind of, inflation, high gas prices, and on it went. So why? Because everything was set for this so-called red wave. I'll tell you why. We are living in a post-Christian society, and the solution to all of this is not strictly in politics. This is going to have to be one person, one heart at a time, and it starts with literally dealing with the spiritual problems that people have. And I don't want to go off into that right now. You can come to church on Sunday and I'll lay it out how we do that. But I know that many of you, many of us, sat there last night watching election results, and you kind of knew around 10:30 or so that, yeah, where's this red wave? Now, there were certain things that were pleasantly surprising. Some House seats did flip in New York. But then, Massachusetts counterbalances that by putting the first openly lesbian governor in a governor's mansion. And Massachusetts is always an interesting dichotomy. They rotate every other term. They have a Republican governor, then they go Democrat. Then they go Republican, then they go Democrat. Someone once said they like fiscally conservative governors in Massachusetts. Even if they've got a D by their name, they've got to be fiscally conservative. In other words, the people actually have to live in liberal Massachusetts want fiscal responsibility, but they want a bunch of woke, liberal, social nonsense. And any of their really radical, social Democrat leadership that's also liberal when it comes to spending money, they export them to Washington, like Ted Kennedy and Elizabeth Warren. And I'm sure there's some truth to that. We take a look around, and we didn't flip the seats we needed to flip. But again, I do go back to, in the natural sense of looking at this, wondering what would have happened if the Republicans Party had actually gotten behind Dr. Oz, had really leaned into what was happening in Arizona, had really gotten behind Herschel Walker. I do think that there were rhinos, and I think the Bush family is in this part of it up to their eyeballs in helping to blunt the sword for last night. And you're already hearing the pundits now, the rhinos and the so-called, I call them fake media conservatives like Ben Shapiro. The mantra is going to be on now for the next 2 years, DeSantis, DeSantis, DeSantis. And listen, I like Ron DeSantis. When I was on the radio in Florida, I helped Ron DeSantis get elected. Like Ron DeSantis, good man. And he has done a phenomenal job in Florida. I'm not quite sure why President Trump said what he said about him, but be that as it may, Ron did a great job in Florida, but there's an issue. And I don't think that what he's done in Florida translates to him being able to fight the good fight in Washington, D.C. Because in Florida, he is surrounded by people who actually brought him further right than what he actually is. Don't miss that. He has not brought the state further right. They brought him further right. They gave him the ability and the courage to wage the fights he fought, and they stood with him. Donald Trump, from the moment he got to Washington, D.C., most of his own party on Capitol Hill didn't stand with him because they were too caught up in wondering and believing about Russian collusion. So I don't know that Ron DeSantis is, quote, the guy. I know what most people like about him is that he's Trump-esque in his policies and what he believes, and he does push back, but without some of the hard edge, without some of the quote-unquote baggage. I get it. I get it. But that's going to be the narrative now moving forward. And, of course, the Democrats will feel emboldened. So basically, the country is where it is. It is stuck. It is deeply divided. There are definitely no more. Ronald Reagan used to talk about, now is not the time to be a pastel. Now is the time to be a bolt. Well, you're either blue or you're red, and there's no middle ground in between. Now there are some other things that are not being talked about in the race for Georgia Senate. Or the U.S. Senate out of Georgia. There was a libertarian that was running. And I'm sure he siphoned away just enough votes from Herschel Walker to make the mess that we've got there now. And again, in Pennsylvania, They certainly needed a much stronger conservative candidate with some charisma and a way to connect with people as the gubernatorial candidate, which they did not have. But this is where we're at today. We have to accept the fact that we, the traditional conservatives, traditional faith and values, we are the minority. Even within our own party, we are the minority. That's where we're at. But be not dismayed. I know the author of the book, and in the end, we win.